The telephone rang at 3 in the morning with that specific vibration that announces misfortune. I answered with trembling hands, and the first thing I heard was a gut-wrenching scream that pierced my chest like a knife. It was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, howling from somewhere that sounded cold and filled with echoes. "Where is that old hag? I'm going to end her!" Her words bounced against my ears while I tried to understand what was happening. We forced the door to her beach house. We wanted to throw a party there with my family. And there was a trap. "I'm in the hospital with broken legs." My heart stopped for a second. It wasn't fear I felt. It was something different, something I couldn't name just yet. In the background, I could hear the voices of doctors, machines beeping, and my son, Jason, screaming that he was coming to my apartment immediately. The call cut off, and I remained sitting in bed, with the darkness of my room wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. 30 minutes later, I heard violent pounding on my apartment door. They were blows of fury, from someone coming to demand answers. I got up slowly, put on my robe, and walked toward the entrance with a calmness that even I didn't understand. When I opened the door, Jason was there with his face unhinged, eyes bloodshot, and hair messy. But the instant his gaze crossed the threshold and saw what was behind me, his entire body froze. His mouth opened without emitting a sound. His skin turned the color of ash. And then, for the first time in 35 years, my son understood that the woman in front of him was no longer the same one he had learned to ignore. "Hello, everyone. I'm Eleanor. I am 62 years old, and for the last 3 decades, I have lived like a shadow in my own life. I know this sounds dramatic, but it is the purest truth I can tell. This story you are about to hear didn't start that early morning with the call from the hospital. It began much earlier, in the silences I swallowed, in the humiliations I accepted, and in every time I lowered my gaze to keep the family peace. But that night, everything changed. That night, something that had been fracturing inside me for years finally broke. My life was always simple. I was born into a working-class family, became an elementary school teacher, married Robert when I was 24, and together we built a modest life full of small joys. Robert was a civil engineer, a good man who died 7 years ago from a massive heart attack while driving home on the interstate. His death tore me in two. I didn't just lose my life partner, I lost my place in the world. Jason, our only son, was already married to Tiffany by then, and right from the funeral, I felt that something in my relationship with him had broken forever. Tiffany had a way of looking at him that unsettled me. It was a possessive, controlling look, as if Jason were an extension of her will and not an independent person. I worked at a public school in the city, teaching 2nd grade. I loved my job. I loved seeing how those little minds lit up when they understood something new. But at 57, after more than 30 years in front of the chalkboard, I decided to retire. My Social Security checks weren't huge, barely $2,000 a month, but with the savings Robert and I had put away in our 401k over the years, I could live without financial stress. I had my condo in the city, a 2-bedroom place in an older but well-maintained building, and the beach cottage that Robert had bought 15 years before he passed. That house was our sanctuary. It was 2 hours from the city, in a small coastal town where the air tasted of salt, and the mornings arrived with the sound of seagulls. It was a simple structure with white siding, a wooden deck, and a garden full of blue hydrangeas that I had planted myself. Robert and I spent every long weekend there. We cooked together, walked along the shore, and read in hammocks under the shade of the trees. That house held the happiest memories of my marriage. After Robert's death, I discovered the house was completely paid off and the deed was solely in my name. He had been meticulous with the paperwork. Everything was in order. But from the moment Tiffany found out that I was the sole owner of that property, something changed. Her visits to my condo became more frequent. She would arrive without warning, always with Jason by her side, and start asking questions. "Eleanor, why do you need such a big house if you live alone? Jason and I are thinking about having kids soon. We need more space. Don't you think it would be better if you gave it to us? After all, you're getting old, and you don't use it that much." I tried to respond with patience, explaining that the house had enormous sentimental value to me, that it was the last tangible link to Robert. But Tiffany didn't listen. She wasn't looking for a conversation. She was looking for a surrender. My son remained silent during these exchanges. He never defended me. He never asked his wife to respect my decisions. He simply looked the other way, as if it weren't his problem. Over time, the hints turned into open pressure. Tiffany brought her brother, Bradley, to family gatherings. Bradley was a burly man with a deep voice who worked in real estate. He started telling me that I didn't know how to take care of a property, that the cottage was deteriorating, and that if I didn't use it, I should sell it or transfer the deed before it lost value. Besides, Eleanor, he would say with that fake smile that churned my stomach, at your age, maintaining 2 properties is a lot of work. You should simplify your life. I nodded in silence, but inside, something began to harden. Things got worse after my retirement. Tiffany decided I had too much free time and started showing up at my condo with lists of errands. Eleanor, I need you to watch my niece this afternoon. Eleanor, can you wash these clothes? The laundromat is full. Eleanor, I'm leaving these boxes here for a few days. I accepted everything because I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. I didn't want Jason to have to choose between his mother and his wife. But every time I gave an inch, Tiffany took a mile. One day she arrived with Bradley, and they told me they had spoken to a lawyer. They wanted me to sign a document giving them temporary use of the beach house, just for the weekends. Eleanor, it's no big deal, Bradley said. That way, it's not abandoned. I read the document carefully and saw that it wasn't just temporary use. It was a cession of rights that could eventually be interpreted as a donation. I refused to sign. That was the first time I saw true rage in Tiffany's eyes. Her face contorted, and for a moment, I thought she was going to hit me. Jason grabbed her by the arm, and they left my apartment without saying goodbye. For weeks, I didn't receive any calls. There were no visits. The silence was so heavy I could almost touch it. 3 weeks went by without news from Jason. 3 weeks in which my phone remained mute, without a single call, without a text asking how I was. I tried to convince myself it was better this way, that maybe they needed time to accept my decision. But deep down, a part of me felt abandoned. I had raised that boy alone during the early years, while Robert worked double shifts to build us a future. I had sacrificed my own dreams so he could go to a good state university. And now, he treated me as if I were an obstacle in his path. In the 4th week, Tiffany reappeared. She rang the doorbell on a Tuesday afternoon, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a box of pastries in her hands. Eleanor, forgive me for reacting badly last time. I was stressed with work and said things I shouldn't have. Jason and I want to invite you to dinner this weekend. We're going to have a small family get-together. Nothing formal. Her voice sounded sweet, almost tender. But there was something in her posture that made me uncomfortable. I accepted the invitation because I still believed things could be fixed. I still thought that if I made the effort to be kind and understanding, they would eventually respect me. How naive I was. The dinner was at the apartment Jason and Tiffany rented in a suburban neighborhood. It was a modern place, with minimalist furniture and walls painted a light gray. When I arrived, there were already several people sitting in the living room. I recognized Bradley, Tiffany's father, a cousin of hers, and 2 people I hadn't seen before. They greeted me with cold politeness, the kind used with awkward strangers. The dinner started normally. We talked about trivialities, the weather, the news, the prices of gas and groceries that wouldn't stop rising. But halfway through the meal, Tiffany raised her glass of wine and said loudly, I want to propose a toast. To families that know how to share, and to people who understand that at a certain age, it is better to let go of material things and focus on the spiritual. Everyone raised their glasses. I remained motionless, with mine on the table. I knew perfectly well what she was referring to. Bradley cleared his throat and added, It's true. I always say that holding on to properties that aren't being used is selfish. There are young people who need to grow, start families, build futures. Old people should understand that. His words fell on me like stones. I looked at Jason, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to ask them to stop. But he just looked at his plate, cutting his steak into small pieces, as if nothing happening had anything to do with him. I felt something break inside me. It wasn't just sadness. It was a cold rage beginning to climb up my spine. Tiffany's cousin, a woman named Jessica who worked as an accountant, leaned toward me and said in a condescending voice, "Eleanor, I know it's hard to accept, but at your age, you should think about moving to a smaller place. A one-bedroom apartment would be enough for you. And the beach house, well, you could sell it or give it to Jason. He is your only son. Eventually, everything will be his anyway. Why not do it now when he really needs it?" I felt the room shrinking. All eyes were on me, waiting for my answer, waiting for me to give in. Tiffany smiled from her chair with that expression of anticipated triumph. I took a deep breath and said with a steady voice, "That house is mine. My husband bought it with his hard work. It holds our memories. And as long as I am alive, no one is going to pressure me to give it away." The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany's father let out an awkward laugh and mumbled something about old people becoming stubborn. Tiffany dropped her fork against the plate with a metallic noise that made me jump. "You are incredibly selfish, Eleanor. Jason is your son, and you don't care about his happiness. You would prefer to see that house empty and falling to pieces rather than give it to your own blood." I got up from the table without finishing my meal. I took my purse and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. Jason didn't even look up from his plate. That night, I cried until I ran out of tears. I cried for the son I had lost, for the weak man he had become, for all the years I had invested trying to be a good mother, only to end up being treated like a burden. But when dawn broke, something had changed. I no longer felt sadness. I felt clarity. I understood that I was never going to earn their respect by being compliant. I understood that Tiffany would never stop until she got what she wanted. And I understood that if I didn't defend myself, no one else would. That morning, I made decisions that would change everything. I called a locksmith and changed the locks on my condo. I called the security company and contracted a system with alarms and cameras. Then I drove 2 hours to the beach house and did the same there. I hired a lawyer and asked him to review all my property documents to ensure everything was legally armored. I explained the situation, and he looked at me with a mixture of pity and admiration. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, "you are doing the right thing. I have seen too many cases of families stripping their elders of their assets. Do not let that happen to you." Over the next few weeks, I became a different person. I wasn't the submissive Eleanor who accepted everything with a tired smile. I was someone who had woken up from a long and painful dream. I installed security cameras in every corner of my condo and the beach house. They were small but powerful cameras, with night vision and a direct connection to my phone. I could see in real time everything that happened at both properties. I also hired Susan, my neighbor at the beach, to watch the house when I wasn't there. Susan was 58, a widow like me, and lived on the adjacent property. We had become friends during the years Robert and I spent there on weekends. She was an observant woman, the kind who notices every detail, every suspicious movement. I explained my situation without going into too many details, and she understood immediately. "Eleanor, I've seen it all in this life. Families that tear each other apart for money, children who abandon their parents, daughters-in-law who are real vipers. Don't worry, I'll keep an eye out. If anyone approaches your house without your permission, I'll know about it." Her words gave me a peace of mind I hadn't felt in months. Jason tried to contact me 3 weeks after the disastrous dinner. He called me on a Sunday morning, his voice hesitant, almost fearful. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I stop by your apartment this afternoon?" I told him yes, but not because I wanted to reconcile. I wanted to see how far he was willing to go. He arrived at 4 in the afternoon, alone, without Tiffany. That was already unusual. When I opened the door, I noticed he was thinner, with deep, dark circles under his eyes and an expression of exhaustion that made me feel a pang of maternal worry I tried to ignore. We went into the living room and sat in silence for a few seconds that seemed eternal. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, Tiffany is very upset with you. She says you humiliated her at dinner, that you were rude to her family. I tried to explain your point of view, but she doesn't want to listen." I stared at him, waiting for him to continue. "She wants me to apologize on her behalf, and for you to reconsider the house. We are seriously thinking about having a baby, and we need more space. The apartment where we live is very small, and the rent is through the roof. If you gave us the beach house, we could sell it and buy something bigger in the city. His words fell on me like a bucket of ice water. He wasn't there to apologize. He wasn't there because he missed me, or because he worried about me. He was there as his wife's messenger, repeating a script she had written. I took a deep breath before responding. Jason, that house is not for sale. I am not going to give it to you or anyone. It is my house, bought with your father's hard work, and the most important memories of my life are kept there. If you need more space, get extra jobs, save money, apply for a loan, but do not count on my property. I saw his face harden. Mom, don't be like that. You're my mother. You're supposed to help me. I am your only son. Everything you have will eventually be mine. Why not give it to me now when I really need it? His words hurt more than I imagined. Not because they were cruel, but because they were sincere. He really believed that I owed him my assets just for being his son. He really thought that my life, my sacrifices, and my decisions didn't matter compared to his needs. Jason, I told him with a firm voice, I gave you everything I could give you while you were growing up. I gave you an education, food, a roof, love. I sacrificed my own dreams so you could have yours. But that doesn't mean that now I must sacrifice my stability, my future, and my financial security to solve your problems. You are a grown man with a job and a wife. It is time for you to build your own life without expecting me to hand it to you on a silver platter. He stood up abruptly from the chair. I can't believe how selfish you've become. Tiffany was right about you. He left, slamming the door so hard it made the walls shake. I heard his steps going down the stairs with fury, and then the absolute silence that remained in my apartment wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed awake looking at the ceiling, wondering at what moment I had lost my son. Had it been when he married Tiffany, or had it been much earlier? When Robert died and I was left alone, not knowing how to fill that void? Maybe Jason had always been like this, and I simply didn't want to see it. Maybe I had raised a son who only valued me for what I could give him, not for who I was. The thought destroyed me, but it also liberated me. If he didn't value me, then there was no point in continuing to sacrifice myself for his approval. The following days were strangely quiet. I didn't receive any more calls. There were no more unexpected visits. I started to enjoy my solitude. I read books I had put off for years. I cooked just for myself, watched old movies that made me cry with nostalgia. Every 2 weeks, I drove to the beach house and spent the entire weekend there. Susan came over to drink coffee with me in the mornings and told me the town gossip. I felt at peace for the first time in a long while. I walked on the beach barefoot, felt the sand between my toes, listened to the sound of the waves, and remembered the happy days with Robert. Those memories no longer hurt as much. They were beginning to be a comfort rather than an open wound. But that peace wasn't going to last. One Friday afternoon, while I was at the beach house fixing the garden, Susan appeared at my gate with a worried expression. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. Yesterday I saw a man lurking around your property. He was heavy-set, wearing a green shirt, and he was walking around the house for almost half an hour. He took photos with his phone and tried to open the back door. I went out and asked him what he was doing, and he told me he was a relative of yours, that he was checking the condition of the house because you had asked him to. I told him that was a lie, that I was your neighbor and you hadn't mentioned anything to me. He left quickly, but it gave me a bad feeling. My heart started beating faster. By the description, I knew exactly who it was. Bradley, Tiffany's brother. They were planning something. I checked the security cameras immediately, and sure enough, there he was, looking in the windows, testing the doors, taking notes on his phone. I downloaded the videos and saved them in 3 different places. I knew I was going to need that proof. I thanked Susan for being vigilant and asked her to call me immediately if she saw him again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I knew something was about to happen. I could feel it in the air, like that static electricity that precedes a storm. 2 weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a man who introduced himself as a code enforcement officer from the municipality. He told me they had received an anonymous complaint about the condition of my beach house, that it was allegedly in dangerous condition and presented a risk to the neighbors. They needed to do an urgent inspection. I told him my house was in perfect condition, that I visited it regularly, and that I found it very suspicious that they received a complaint just now. He insisted it was standard procedure. We agreed on an appointment for the following week. After hanging up, I called my lawyer. I told him about the inspection and about Bradley lurking around the property. He told me they were likely trying to find some legal irregularity to force me to sell or to demonstrate that I wasn't capable of maintaining the property. Eleanor, he said in a serious tone, prepare for the worst. These people aren't going to stop until they get what they want, but you have the law on your side. Keep everything documented, all communications, all attempts at harassment. This could end up being very useful. His words made me nervous, but they also gave me strength. I wasn't alone in this. I had resources, I had proof, I had allies. The municipal inspection turned out to be exactly what I imagined. A farce. The inspector arrived with a notebook and a camera, checking every corner of the beach house, looking for something he could categorize as a deficiency or hazard. I followed him step by step, watching how he took photos of the most insignificant cracks in the walls, how he noted that a window had a slightly worn frame, how he pointed out that the wooden deck needed maintenance. It was all ridiculous. The house was in excellent condition for being more than 15 years old. When he finished, he handed me a preliminary report listing several alleged minor irregularities. Mrs. Eleanor, I'm going to have to send this report to the city. It is possible they will require you to make repairs within a set time frame. If you don't comply, they could fine you or, in extreme cases, declare the property uninhabitable. His words sounded rehearsed, as if he were reciting a script. I asked him who had made the original complaint. He told me it was confidential information. Of course it was. I knew perfectly well who was behind all this. That same afternoon, I called my lawyer and sent him photos of the report. He reviewed every point and confirmed what I already suspected. Everything was exaggerated. Nothing represented a real danger, and any sensible judge would dismiss those accusations. But he warned me, Eleanor, this is just the beginning. They are going to keep pressing on different fronts. I need you to be mentally prepared for a war of attrition. They expect you to get tired, to give up, to decide it's not worth fighting. I told him I wasn't going to give up. That house was the only thing I had left of Robert, the last tangible piece of our life together. I would prefer to burn it down myself than hand it over to Tiffany and Bradley. My lawyer laughed with that tired laugh of someone who has seen too many legal battles. I like your attitude. We are going to defend your property with everything we have. The following weeks were a bureaucratic nightmare. I received notifications from the city demanding repairs. I hired a certified structural engineer to do his own inspection and give me a technical report refuting the municipal inspector's accusations. The engineer, an older man named Frank who had worked with Robert on several projects, reviewed the house in detail and confirmed it was structurally perfect. Whoever wrote that municipal report was looking for problems where there are none. This house is better maintained than many new constructions I've seen. His professional opinion was key to rebutting the accusations. Meanwhile, Jason's calls became more frequent and more aggressive. He no longer asked, he demanded, Mom, Tiffany is pregnant. We are going to have a baby, and we need that house more than ever. You can't keep being so selfish. Think of your grandchild, of the family we are building. The news of the pregnancy should have filled me with joy. I was going to be a grandmother, but the only thing I felt was deep sadness and an icy rage. They were using a baby who hadn't even been born yet as a tool for emotional manipulation. I responded with a steady voice. Jason, congratulations on the baby. I hope you are very happy. But that doesn't change anything regarding my property. The house is mine and will continue to be mine. If you need space, look for other options. There are loans, housing programs, 1,000 alternatives that don't involve stripping me of what is mine. He yelled something I didn't manage to understand and hung up. That was the last time we spoke before everything exploded. The days passed with a constant tension that ate me up inside. I slept poorly, ate little, lived in a state of permanent alert, checking the security cameras every 2 hours. Susan called me almost every day to report that everything was quiet at the beach house, but I felt that something big was about to happen. It was like living in the calm before the hurricane, knowing the destructive wind is about to arrive, but being unable to do anything but wait. One Saturday night, 3 months after the last conversation with Jason, I decided to stay in my city condo instead of going to the beach house as I usually did. I was tired, traffic had been horrible all week, and I simply wanted to rest. I went to bed early, around 10 at night, and fell asleep watching an old movie on TV. It was the phone ringing at 3 in the morning that woke me. The sound drilled into my sleep like an emergency alarm. I answered, without looking at who was calling, heart already racing with the feeling that something terrible had happened. And then I heard that scream, that howl of fury and pain that pierced the phone line like a knife. It was Tiffany. Her voice was distorted by rage and suffering. "Where is that old hag? I'm going to end her." We forced the door to her beach house. We wanted to throw a party there with my family, and there was a trap. "I'm in the hospital with broken legs." The words came out rushed, mixed with sobs and screams in the background. I heard nurses asking for calm, machines beeping, and Jason's voice shouting that he was coming immediately to my apartment to demand explanations. The call cut off abruptly, and I remained sitting in bed, phone still in hand, trying to process what I had just heard. They forced the door. They entered without my permission. They wanted to throw a party in my house. And Tiffany had gotten hurt. A tiny part of me felt worry, but it was immediately crushed by another, much more powerful emotion. The satisfaction of knowing that they had finally crossed the line so obviously that they could no longer deny their intentions. I got up, put on my robe, and walked to the living room. I turned on all the lights and made myself tea with trembling hands. I knew Jason would arrive at any moment. I knew he would come furious, blinded by his wife's accusations, ready to blame me for everything. But this time I was ready. This time I had proof, witnesses, and a mental clarity that had taken me months to build. I checked my phone and opened the security camera app for the beach house. What I saw confirmed everything. The recordings showed Tiffany, Bradley, and 3 other people I didn't recognize arriving at my property around 11 at night. They brought cases of beer, bags of food, music. They tried to open the door with a key that obviously didn't work because I had changed the locks months ago. After several failed attempts, Bradley took out a crowbar and forced the lock until he broke it completely. They entered as if they owned the place. They turned on lights, blasted music, opened bottles. Tiffany walked through the house with a glass in her hand, pointing at walls and furniture, clearly imagining how she would redecorate it all. I saw her enter the master bedroom, the bedroom where Robert and I had slept so many nights, and sit on the bed laughing with her brother. I felt a wave of fury so intense I had to close my eyes for a moment, but I kept watching. I needed to see everything. At approximately 2 in the morning, Tiffany went up to the 2nd floor. The house had a wooden staircase that led to a small attic I used for storage. That staircase had been in bad condition for months. I had put huge warning signs at the entrance. Danger, unstable staircase, do not enter. The signs were there, clearly visible in the recordings. But Tiffany ignored them completely. She went up with her wine glass in hand, laughing, and when she reached the 5th step, the wood gave way under her weight. I saw her fall. I saw her fall in slow motion through my phone screen, her body spinning in the air, the wine glass flying out of her hand, her mouth opening in a silent scream that the recording didn't capture but that I could imagine perfectly. The impact was brutal. She fell sideways against the wooden floor of the 1st level, with her legs bent at angles that were not natural. The sound must have been horrible because immediately everyone in the house ran toward her. Bradley arrived first, kneeling beside her, shouting her name. The other guests took out their phones, some recording, others calling 911. I saw Tiffany writhing in pain, face contorted, hands clutching her legs. Almost 20 minutes passed until the ambulance arrived. 20 minutes in which she screamed, cried, and between sobs repeated over and over, "That old witch planned it. She planned everything. She wanted to kill me." The paranoia of pain had led her to a completely delirious but convenient conclusion for her narrative. In her mind, I had left that broken staircase intentionally as a death trap. It didn't matter that there were warning signs. It didn't matter that they had illegally entered my property. In her twisted head, I was the villain of this story. The paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher with extreme care. I heard one of them say she likely had multiple fractures in both legs. They took her out of my house while Bradley hurriedly collected the bottles and food, trying to erase evidence that they had been partying. But it was too late. Everything was recorded. Every second, every movement, every reckless decision was registered in high-definition video with a time and date stamp. I downloaded all the files immediately and saved them on 3 different devices: my computer, a USB drive, and the cloud. Then I called my lawyer. It was almost 4 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. He answered with a sleepy and confused voice. I quickly explained what had happened and told him I was sending the videos immediately. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard a short, dry laugh. "Eleanor, this is better than we could have imagined. They just committed breaking and entering, destruction of private property, and are trying to blame you for an accident caused by their own negligence. With these recordings, we can not only defend ourselves, we can counterattack." His words filled me with a dark satisfaction I didn't know I was capable of feeling. I hung up with him just when I heard the pounding on my door. They were violent, desperate blows from someone who had completely lost control. I took a deep breath, smoothed my robe, and walked toward the entrance with slow, deliberate steps. Every step was an affirmation of power, a reminder to myself that I was no longer the woman who shrank from conflict. I opened the door, and there was Jason. His appearance was devastating. His hair was completely messy, his shirt buttoned wrong, his eyes red and swollen as if he had been crying for hours. His face was a mask of fury and pain. He raised his arm as if to point at me accusingly, but then his gaze drifted toward the interior of my apartment. I saw his eyes widen, his mouth slowly open, and all color leave his face, leaving it the shade of wax. What he saw behind me left him completely paralyzed. On the dining room table, perfectly arranged, were 3 sets of documents. The first was the engineer's report certifying that my house was in perfect structural condition. The second was a folder with printed screenshots from the security cameras showing Bradley lurking around the property weeks ago. And the third, the most important, was a large manila envelope containing high-resolution printed photographs of that night's invasion. Bradley forcing the lock, Tiffany entering with bottles of alcohol, everyone toasting in my living room, and finally, a sequence of images showing Tiffany deliberately ignoring the danger signs before going up the stairs. But it wasn't just that. Next to the documents, sitting in one of my dining chairs calmly drinking coffee, was my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He had arrived 15 minutes before Jason, after I called him a second time telling him my son was on his way. Beside him was another man Jason didn't recognize, but whom I knew was Mike, a private investigator my lawyer had hired 2 weeks ago when the pressure intensified. And on the living room TV, frozen on a giant screen, was the exact image of the moment Bradley destroyed the lock on my door. Jason stood on the threshold, literally unable to move. His mouth opened and closed without making a sound. His hands trembled at his sides. Finally, he managed to articulate a word: "Mom." It wasn't an accusation. It was a terrified whisper from someone who had just understood he had completely underestimated his opponent. I said nothing. I simply stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. He advanced like a sleepwalker, with hesitant steps, unable to look away from all the evidence displayed before him. My lawyer stood up and introduced himself formally. "Good evening, Mr. Jason. I am Mr. Henderson, your mother's attorney. I regret that we have to meet under these circumstances." Jason could barely process what he was seeing. He let himself fall onto the sofa as if his legs could no longer hold him. "What is all this?" he asked with a broken voice. I sat across from him, in the armchair that had been Robert's favorite, and looked him directly in the eyes. "This, Jason, is the truth. The truth that you and your wife have tried to distort for months. The truth that you have harassed, pressured, and finally invaded my private property with the intention of seizing it." My voice was cold, controlled, without a shred of the maternal emotion that had characterized all our previous interactions. The lawyer took the floor. He explained point by point what the recordings showed: the illegal invasion, the destruction of property, the consumption of alcohol on someone else's property, Tiffany's negligence in ignoring clearly visible warning signs, and finally, the false accusation that I had set some kind of intentional trap, Your wife, Mr. Jason, is currently in a hospital accusing your mother of attempted murder. That is a serious criminal accusation that could result in a police investigation. However, these recordings demonstrate beyond a doubt that the accident was a direct result of your wife's reckless actions while committing a crime. If she persists in her accusations, your mother has not only the right but the legal obligation to defend herself by pressing criminal charges for trespassing, destruction of property, and defamation. Every word fell on Jason like a hammer blow. I saw his face go from shock to comprehension, and finally to the horror of understanding the legal implications. "Mom, please," he finally managed to say. "Tiffany is pregnant. She's in the hospital. You can't do this to her now." His voice was pleading, desperate, the voice of a scared child. And for the first time in months, I felt something resembling compassion. But it was a compassion tempered by rage, hardened by months of abuse, fortified by the certainty that if I gave in now, it would never end. "Jason," I said with a soft but firm voice, "I didn't do anything to Tiffany. She did this to herself. You invaded my house, destroyed my property, planned to throw a party in the place where your father and I built our most precious memories. And when the consequences of her reckless actions caught up with her, she immediately tried to turn me into the villain." I leaned forward, holding his gaze. For months I have endured pressure, manipulation, humiliation. I have heard how you call me selfish for not giving away my assets. I have seen how you, my only son, remained silent while your wife and her family treated me like a burden. I have endured fake inspections, baseless accusations, attempts to make me look like a senile old woman, incapable of taking care of her properties. All because you wanted something that didn't belong to you. The silence that followed was absolute. Jason had tears running down his cheeks. "I didn't know things had gone that far," he mumbled. "Tiffany told me you were being difficult, but I didn't know they planned to enter the house without your permission. I wasn't there tonight. I was working a double shift. When Tiffany called me from the hospital screaming, I just thought you had done something terrible." His confession broke my heart and infuriated me at the same time. Even in that moment, even with all the evidence in front of him, his first instinct had been to believe her and blame me. "That is precisely the problem, Jason," I told him. "You have always assumed the worst of me and the best of her. You never defended me. You never questioned her versions. You simply accepted that I was the problem and she was the victim." I stood up, indicating the conversation was coming to an end. "Now you have a decision to make. You can go to the hospital and tell your wife to drop her accusations against me immediately. You can explain to her that you committed a serious crime and that if she persists in blaming me, she will face criminal charges that could result in prison time even while pregnant. Or you can keep defending her blindly and watch how this matter ends up in court, where I have all the evidence on my side." Jason sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs that would have destroyed me just a few months ago. But now, watching him crumble in front of me, I only felt a cold void where unconditional love used to be. The lawyer handed him a box of tissues with a professional gesture, but not devoid of some compassion. "Mr. Jason," he said firmly, "I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Your wife and your brother-in-law committed breaking and entering, a felony that in this state can result in up to 3 years in prison. Additionally, there is destruction of private property, evidenced by the forced lock, which will cost approximately $500 to replace. And finally, there is the false accusation against your mother, which constitutes defamation and could be interpreted as attempted fraud if it is determined they sought to benefit financially from blaming Mrs. Eleanor." Every word was another nail in the coffin of Tiffany's defense. Jason looked up, eyes swollen and red. "What do you want me to do, Mom?" he asked with a broken voice. It was the first time in years he actually asked me what I wanted, instead of simply assuming what I should give him. I took a deep breath before answering. "I want you to go to the hospital and talk to your wife. I want you to explain that she has exactly 24 hours to retract all her accusations against me, to publicly accept that the accident was the result of her own negligence by invading my property and ignoring warning signs, and to commit in writing never to approach any of my properties again without my explicit consent. If she does that, I will not press criminal charges. But if she refuses, If she continues with this narrative that I set some trap, then I am going to use every legal resource at my disposal to defend myself and to ensure she faces the consequences of her actions. My voice didn't tremble. Every word came out with crystal clarity. Jason looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger. "Mom, she's pregnant. She has broken legs. How can you be so cold?" His question would have made me back down before. It would have made me feel guilty, cruel, like the villain they wanted me to be. But not anymore. "Jason," I said, leaning toward him, "I didn't break her legs. She decided to invade my house illegally. She decided to go up a staircase marked as dangerous. She decided to ignore all warning signs because she assumed my property was hers. And now she is trying to make me responsible for the consequences of her own decisions. That is not coldness on my part. That is justice." The private investigator, Mike, who had remained silent until that moment, finally spoke. He was a man of about 50, with gray hair and a serious expression. "Mr. Jason, for the last 2 weeks I have been documenting the movements of your brother-in-law, Bradley. I have photographic evidence of at least 6 occasions where he was lurking around this property without authorization. I have recordings of him talking on the phone about plans to get the old lady's house. I have records that he contacted the code enforcement officer who made the false report about the property condition. And I have proof that he paid him $500 in cash 2 days before the inspection." He opened a folder and showed Jason the photographs. There was Bradley, clearly visible, handing an envelope to a man in front of a coffee shop. The photos had timestamps and GPS location. It was irrefutable evidence of bribery and conspiracy. Jason paled even more if that was possible. "It can't be," he mumbled. "Bradley told me he was just helping us get a better opportunity." The investigator smiled humorlessly. "Sir, your brother-in-law was helping himself. According to my investigations, he plans to buy your mother's property at a foreclosure price once they manage to force her to sell. He had already contacted 2 real estate agencies to appraise it." The revelation fell on Jason like a bucket of ice water. The whole plan unfolded in front of him with terrible clarity. It wasn't just that Tiffany wanted the house for them. Bradley had orchestrated everything with the intention of keeping the property for himself, probably promising Jason and Tiffany some minor share, or simply manipulating them to do the dirty work. "Mom," Jason said with a broken voice, "I didn't know any of this. You have to believe me. Tiffany told me we just wanted a better place to raise our son. I thought we were fighting for our family, not for Bradley's interests. I wanted to believe her. A part of me, that maternal part that never completely dies, wanted to hug him and tell him everything would be okay. But I had learned that limitless compassion only invites more abuse. I don't know if I believe you, Jason," I told him honestly. "But right now that doesn't matter. What matters is what you are going to do now. Are you going to choose to protect your wife and her corrupt brother? Or are you going to do the right thing?" My lawyer intervened again. "Mr. Jason, I need your answer now. If your mother is going to press charges, we must do it within the next few hours to maximize the legal impact. Every minute that passes, Tiffany is in that hospital telling her distorted version to doctors, nurses, maybe even the police. If she files a formal complaint first, even though we have all this evidence, the process becomes more complicated and expensive. Your mother has the right to defend herself proactively." Jason stood up, staggering slightly. "I'm going to the hospital now. I'm going to talk to Tiffany, but I need you to give me time. Mom, she is medicated. In shock, she just suffered a terrible accident. I can't simply arrive and demand she sign legal documents." My lawyer shook his head. "Precisely why we need to act fast. The more time passes, the more she will cling to her version of events. The shock can be used in our favor, so she faces the reality of what she did before she builds an elaborate narrative." It was brutal, but true. I looked at Jason and felt a wave of contradictory emotions. He was my son. I had carried him in my womb, raised him, loved him unconditionally for 35 years. But he was also a grown man who had allowed his wife to mistreat me, humiliate me, and attempt to strip me of my assets. "You have until tomorrow at noon," I told him finally. 24 hours exactly. If by then I don't have a document signed by Tiffany retracting her accusations and accepting responsibility for the invasion, I am going to press criminal charges against her and Bradley. And believe me, Jason, it is not an empty threat. I am tired of being treated like an obstacle in other people's lives. This is my line in the sand." Jason nodded slowly, like a man walking to the gallows. He headed toward the door with heavy steps. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "Do you still love me, Mom?" he asked, with a childish voice that destroyed me. I had to swallow the lump in my throat before answering. "I will always love you, Jason. You are my son, and that will never change. But love does not mean allowing myself to be trampled on. True love also includes boundaries, respect, and consequences. I love you enough not to allow you to become an accomplice to something so destructive." He lowered his head and left, closing the door softly behind him. As soon as he left, I collapsed on the sofa. All the adrenaline that had kept me strong during the confrontation evaporated at once. I started shaking uncontrollably. My lawyer approached and put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did very well, Eleanor. I know it wasn't easy, but it was necessary." The private investigator packed his folders and left me copies of all the evidence he had collected. "Ma'am, you are one of the bravest clients I have seen. Most people in your situation would have caved months ago. You stood firm." His words comforted me, but they didn't alleviate the weight in my chest. I felt simultaneously powerful and shattered. I had won a battle, but the emotional cost was immense. After they both left, I remained alone in my condo. It was almost 6 in the morning. The sun began to filter through the windows, painting the walls in orange tones. I made myself a strong coffee and sat on the balcony to watch the sunrise over the city. I thought about Robert, about how he would have handled this situation. He probably would have been more diplomatic than me, would have found some way to mediate without reaching these extremes. But Robert was no longer here, and I had had to learn to fight my own battles. The phone rang around 10 in the morning. It was Susan, my neighbor from the beach. "Eleanor, I just saw a police patrol in front of your house. Is everything okay? Do you need me to do anything?" I briefly explained what had happened during the night. She listened in silence and then let out a short laugh. I knew something like this was going to happen. I sensed it since I saw that man lurking. "Look, I'll keep an eye out. If you need me to testify as a witness to anything, count on me. That girl and her brother deserve whatever is coming to them." Her loyalty warmed my heart. At least I had someone on my side. The police eventually arrived at my apartment around noon. It was 2 officers, an older man and a young woman. They explained they had received a report of an accident at my beach property and needed to ask me some questions. I showed them everything: the complete recordings, the property documents, the warning signs that were clearly visible in the videos, the evidence of the forced lock. The officers reviewed everything with professional attention. The woman took notes constantly. When I finished showing them all the evidence, the older officer looked at me with a serious expression. "Mrs. Eleanor, do you want to press charges for trespassing and destruction of property?" It was the million-dollar question. I looked the officer in the eyes before answering. His expression was neutral, professional, waiting for my decision without judging me in any way. The younger officer had stopped writing and was also observing me with attention. "Officers," I finally said, "I'm going to be honest with you. The woman in the hospital is my son's wife. She is pregnant and just suffered an accident that broke both her legs. A part of me, the part that is a mother and grandmother, wants to simply forget all this and move on. But another part, the part that has been harassed, manipulated, and abused for months, knows that if I don't do something now, this will never end." The older officer nodded with understanding. "Ma'am, in my 25 years on the force, I can tell you that family conflicts over property are among the most painful and destructive. I have seen families completely torn apart by fights over inheritances and real estate. What you have here is a clear case of breaking and entering. The evidence is irrefutable. They forced entry, caused damage, and the accident occurred as a direct result of their decision to invade private property, ignoring danger signs." He paused and added, "However, I also understand that pressing charges against your pregnant daughter-in-law is going to cause a permanent fracture in your family. It is a decision only you can make." The young officer intervened for the first time. "Mrs. Eleanor, may I ask you something personal?" I nodded. How many times have you given in to your family's pressure in the past? The question took me by surprise. I thought of all the occasions I had said yes when I wanted to say no, all the times I swallowed my pride, every humiliation accepted in the name of keeping the peace. Too many, was the answer. If you give in now, they will see that it worked. They will learn that they can do whatever they want because you will always forgive, always give another chance, always prioritize family peace over your own dignity. Her words were harsh, but true. The older officer shot his partner a warning look, clearly thinking she had overstepped into the personal, but he didn't correct her. Officers, I told them after a long silence, I need 24 hours to decide. My son is at the hospital right now, talking to his wife. I gave him an ultimatum. Either she retracts her accusations against me and accepts responsibility for the invasion, or I press charges. The deadline expires tomorrow at noon. The older officer closed his notebook. That seems reasonable to us. We are going to leave you our contact information. If you decide to proceed with the charges, call us and we will come to take your formal statement. Meanwhile, we are going to include this case in our system as a preliminary investigation. After the police left, I remained sitting in my living room, surrounded by all the evidence of my family's betrayal. The documents, the photographs, the videos, everything was there, reminding me that the people I had trusted most had failed me in the deepest way. The phone remained silent for hours. Jason didn't call. He didn't send texts. The silence was deafening. I wondered what was happening in that hospital. Was Tiffany screaming, refusing to accept responsibility? Was Jason finally confronting her? Or was he giving in again, allowing her to dictate the narrative? At 6 p.m, unable to stand the wait any longer, I decided to go to the beach house. I needed to see the damage with my own eyes. I needed to be in that space that meant so much to me. The 2-hour drive gave me time to think, to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. When I arrived, the house looked different under the sunset light. The front door hung from its hinges, the lock completely destroyed. There were empty bottles on the deck, cigarette butts in the garden I maintained so carefully. The interior was worse. They had moved furniture, left food scattered in the kitchen, wine stains on the white sofa Robert and I had bought on a trip to the city. Susan appeared at my door moments after my arrival. "Oh, Eleanor," she said with a compassionate voice, "I didn't want you to see this without preparing you." After they took the girl in the ambulance, the others left quickly, but they left all this mess. She hugged me while I contemplated the destruction. It wasn't just the physical damage, it was the violation of the sacred space, the last refuge where memories of Robert lived intact. They had profaned that. They had entered as invaders and contaminated every corner with their disrespect. "Come," Susan said, pulling my arm. "Don't stay here alone tonight. Sleep at my house. Tomorrow, with daylight, we can start cleaning and repairing." But I shook my head. "No, Susan. I need to stay here. I need to reclaim this space. If I leave now, if I let this horrible memory be the last thing I associate with this house, then they will have won even if they lose legally." She understood. She helped me secure the door the best we could with a chair against the broken frame. Then she left me alone with the promise that she would keep watch all night. I spent hours cleaning. I picked up every bottle, washed every dirty dish, scrubbed the stains until my hands were red and sore. It was a physical cleaning, but also a spiritual one, an attempt to purge the contamination of their presence. While I worked, I cried. I cried for my lost son, for the relationship I would never recover, for the innocence I had lost realizing that your own family can become your worst enemy. Around midnight, physically and emotionally exhausted, I made myself tea and sat on the back deck looking at the ocean. The full moon reflected on the waves, creating a silver path that seemed to stretch to infinity. I thought of all the happy moments I had lived in this place. Robert and I dancing barefoot on the sand, making huge breakfasts on Sundays, reading together in hammocks, dreaming of our future. That future had included grandchildren, family gatherings full of love, an old age surrounded by warmth. But the reality was so different from those dreams. The phone vibrated, startling me. It was a text from Jason. "Mom, I need more time. Tiffany is in really bad shape. The doctors say she is going to need surgery on both legs. She is in shock, and the painkillers have her confused. I can't pressure her now. Please give me until the weekend." I read the message 3 times. Every word was a new evasion, a new excuse, a new attempt to protect Tiffany from the consequences of her actions. I replied, "The deadline is 24 hours. More than 12 have already passed. If tomorrow at noon I don't have her signed statement, I am going to proceed with criminal charges. Her health condition is tragic, but it is the result of her own decisions. I am not going to wait indefinitely while she builds a narrative that makes me the villain." I sent the message and turned off the phone. I didn't want to hear his pleas, his justifications, his attempts to make me feel guilty. I had drawn a line, and I wasn't going to cross it. That night I slept on the living room sofa, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of the cologne Robert used. I dreamed of him. In the dream, we were young again, walking on the beach, holding hands. He told me he was proud of me, that I had done the right thing by defending myself. "You were always stronger than you thought," he told me, with that smile of his that lit up everything. "You just needed to remember it." I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but with a feeling of peace I hadn't felt in months. The morning of the deadline dawned clear and bright. The ocean was calm, the sky completely clear. Susan came early with fresh bread and coffee. We had breakfast together on the deck while the sun slowly rose over the horizon. "What are you going to do if they don't comply?" she asked me. "I'm going to press charges," I answered without hesitation. "There is no turning back. I have spent too many years of my life giving in, apologizing, trying to keep the peace at the cost of my own dignity. It's over." She nodded with approval. "I'm glad to hear you say that. You are a strong woman, Eleanor, stronger than they ever imagined." The hours passed with torturous slowness. 10 in the morning, 11, 11:30. My phone remained silent. At 11:45, I dialed my lawyer's number. "Mr. Henderson, it is 15 minutes to noon. I haven't received anything from my son. Proceed with pressing charges." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Eleanor, are you completely sure? Once we do this, there is no going back. Your relationship with your son will likely never recover." "I know," I answered with a steady voice, "and I have made peace with that. My son chose his side a long time ago. I simply stopped refusing to see it." At 12 o'clock exactly, my phone rang. It was Jason. I answered without saying anything, simply waiting. "Mom." His voice sounded broken, exhausted. "Tiffany accepts. She is going to sign the document. But I need you to come to the hospital. She wants to tell you something in person." It was the last thing I expected to hear. "Why?" I asked with suspicion. "Why does she need to tell me in person?" Jason sighed deeply. "Because she finally understood. She finally saw the videos I showed her. She saw how she ignored the signs, how we invaded your property, how Bradley manipulated her. And I think she is genuinely remorseful, or at least she is afraid enough of going to prison to fake remorse convincingly. Honestly, I don't know what to believe anymore." His cynicism surprised me. Maybe there was some hope after all. "I'm on my way," I told him, "but my lawyer is coming with me, and the charges are only suspended, not dropped, until we have everything signed and verified." The hospital was 40 minutes from the beach house. During the entire drive, my lawyer reviewed the documents Tiffany would need to sign. He had prepared 3 copies of each, all duly notarized, and with legal language so airtight it left no room for ambiguous interpretations. "Eleanor," he told me while driving, "prepare yourself for emotional manipulation. It is very common that when defendants see themselves cornered, they resort to tears, pleas, promises of change. Do not let yourself be moved. Remember everything they have done to you." I nodded in silence, mentally repeating all the abuse suffered like a protective mantra. We arrived at the hospital shortly after 1 in the afternoon. It was a modern 5-story building with white walls and that characteristic smell of disinfectant that all hospitals share. Jason was waiting for us in the lobby, sitting in a plastic chair with his head down and hands clasped. When he saw us arrive, he stood up quickly. His appearance was devastating. He had several days' growth of beard, wrinkled clothes as if he had slept in them, deep dark circles that made him look like he had aged 10 years in one night. "Mom," he said with a hoarse voice, "thanks for coming. Tiffany is in room 312, 3rd floor. The doctors did surgery last night on both legs. She has plates and screws now. She is going to need months of rehabilitation." He paused and looked me directly in the eyes. Before going up, I need to tell you something. Last night, after I left your apartment, I didn't go straight to the hospital. I went to Bradley's apartment. My heart raced. He was packing. He had suitcases on the bed, piled clothes, documents he was feeding into a paper shredder. When he saw me enter, he got nervous. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me he had an urgent business trip. It was a lie. He was fleeing. Jason ran his hands over his face with a gesture of extreme exhaustion. I demanded he tell me the truth. I yelled at him, threatened him, finally cornered him until he confessed everything. The plan wasn't just to get your house for us. He wanted to buy it at a low price once they forced you to sell. He had already spoken to investors. He was going to turn it into a small boutique hotel and get rich off it. Tiffany and I were just tools in his plan. The revelation hit me hard, although the private investigator had already suggested something similar. Hearing it confirmed by my own son was different. "Where is Bradley now?" my lawyer asked with a sharp tone. "I don't know," Jason admitted. "He ran out of his apartment when I started screaming that he was a damn con artist. I haven't been able to contact him since. His phone is off." My lawyer took out his phone immediately and called the private investigator to inform him that the main suspect was potentially fleeing. While he spoke, Jason took my hands. His palms were cold and sweaty. "Mom, I am so sorry for all this. I'm sorry for being so blind, so weak. I'm sorry for not defending you when I should have. I'm sorry for allowing Tiffany to treat you like that. I was a bad son, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I finally understand." I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that my son had woken up, that he had seen the light. But years of disappointment had taught me to be cautious. "Jason," I told him with a soft but firm voice, "words are easy. What matters now are actions. Let's go see your wife." We went up to the 3rd floor in a tense silence. The elevator seemed to move with exasperating slowness. When we arrived at room 312, Jason knocked softly before opening. The scene we found inside was desolate. Tiffany was in the hospital bed with both legs elevated, wrapped in casts from ankles to thighs. She had IVs in both arms, a heart monitor connected to her chest, and her face was swollen and pale. When she saw me enter, her eyes filled with tears immediately. "Eleanor," she said with a broken voice, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I remained standing near the door, with my lawyer by my side like a protective shield. I didn't approach the bed. I didn't offer words of comfort. I simply waited. Tiffany was sobbing uncontrollably now. I don't know what happened to me. Bradley convinced me that you were selfish, that you didn't need that house, that we had more right because we were starting a family. He put ideas in my head for months, and I believed them because I wanted to believe them. I wanted to have something big, something beautiful for my baby. "That doesn't justify invading my property," I said with a cold voice. "It doesn't justify months of harassment, humiliations, attempts at legal manipulation. It doesn't justify anything." She nodded frantically. I know. You are completely right. I was horrible to you. I was cruel, manipulative, disrespectful, and now I am paying the consequences." She raised her hands, pointing at her shattered legs. "I'm going to be in these things for months. The doctors say I might never recover full mobility. And the baby." Her voice broke. "They had to give me so many medications for the surgery that now there are risks. I have to be under constant observation." A small part of me felt compassion, but it was a very small part, drowned out by the memory of all the damage she had caused me. My lawyer stepped forward with the documents. "Mrs. Tiffany, I have here 3 declarations you need to sign. The first is a complete retraction of any accusation against Mrs. Eleanor, accepting full responsibility for the accident. The second is a confession of breaking and entering, with a commitment to pay for all damages. The third is a self-imposed restraining order, where you commit not to approach any property of Mrs. Eleanor without her explicit written consent." Tiffany looked at the papers with teary eyes. "If I sign this, you won't press criminal charges against me?" she asked me directly. "The charges remain suspended," my lawyer corrected before I could answer. "Not dropped, suspended. If you violate any of the terms of these agreements, the charges will reactivate immediately, and Mrs. Eleanor will proceed with full legal action." Tiffany paled even more. "And what happens with Bradley?" she asked with a trembling voice. Your brother will face charges regardless, I told her with a cutting tone. Bribery of a municipal officer, conspiracy to commit fraud, breaking and entering. He orchestrated all this, and he is going to pay for it. Whether he is a fugitive right now or not, I saw how the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. Her brother had destroyed her life using her as a pawn. Her marriage was in ruins, her body was broken, her pregnancy was at risk, and all for greed. I'm going to sign, she finally said, with a barely audible voice. I'm going to sign everything. Just please, give me a chance to fix things. My lawyer placed the documents on a clipboard and extended them to her. She signed every page with a trembling hand, her tears staining the paper in some places. A notary public my lawyer had brought verified every signature, stamped his official seals, and handed me the copies. Done, said my lawyer, putting everything in his briefcase. Mrs. Tiffany, these documents are legally binding. Any violation will result in immediate legal action. We headed toward the door, but before leaving, Tiffany called me one last time. Eleanor, will you be able to forgive me someday? I stopped at the threshold without turning around. I don't know, I answered honestly. Right now, the only thing I feel is exhaustion. Maybe with time I can forgive you. But forget, that is never going to happen. I left that room with my head held high, the signed documents in my purse, and the feeling that I had finally recovered something I had lost a long time ago. My dignity. The following months were of reconstruction, not just of my beach house, but of my entire life. I hired a local carpenter to repair the shattered door, replace the dangerous staircase with a new solid structure with safety rails, and restore every corner that had been profaned by the invasion. Every improvement I made wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. I was reclaiming my space, my peace, my right to exist without fear. Susan became something more than a neighbor. She became my closest friend, my confidant, the sister I never had. We drank coffee together every morning on my restored deck, watching the ocean while the sun painted the sky in impossible colors. She told me stories of her own life, of her late husband, of the battles she had fought and won. I told her about Robert, about the happy years, about how I was learning to live without him, but honoring his memory in new ways. You know, she told me one morning while we sipped our coffee, Robert would be proud of you. Not of the woman you were when he lived, but of the woman you have become after his death. That is the true transformation. Jason tried to contact me several times during those first months. Calls I didn't answer, texts I read but didn't reply to, handwritten letters I kept unopened in a drawer. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I needed time to heal, to process all the damage, to decide if I wanted to have any kind of relationship with him in the future. My lawyer kept me informed about Bradley's case. They had found him 3 weeks after his attempted escape, hiding at a cousin's house in another state. He faced multiple criminal charges including bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud, breaking and entering, and obstruction of justice for trying to flee. The trial was scheduled for 6 months from now, and my lawyer was confident he would receive a considerable sentence. That man is going to spend time in prison, he assured me. And he is going to have a permanent criminal record that will ruin any future business he tries to do. Justice felt good, but it didn't fill the void the family rupture had left. I decided to sell my condo in the city. It no longer made sense to keep it. All the memories there were contaminated by the unwanted visits, the confrontations, the nights of insomnia worrying about the next attack. I sold it for a good price to a young couple who had just gotten married and who painfully reminded me of Robert and me decades ago. With the money from the sale, I made extensive improvements to the beach house. I expanded the kitchen, added a small studio where I could read and write, planted a vegetable garden that Susan helped me design. I turned this place into my permanent home, into my sanctuary. I started giving private tutoring to kids in town who needed help with math and reading. I didn't charge much, barely enough to cover materials, but the satisfaction of teaching again was invaluable. The children reminded me why I had loved being a teacher. Their infinite curiosity, their smiles when they finally understood a difficult concept, their genuine gratitude, they filled me with a joy I had forgotten existed. 6 months after the confrontation at the hospital, Jason appeared without warning at my gate. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garden pruning rose bushes when I heard a car stop in front of my house. I turned, and there he was, getting out of his vehicle with slow and cautious movements, like someone approaching a wild animal that could flee at any moment. He looked different, thinner, with gray hairs I didn't remember seeing before, but also with something in his eyes that was new. Clarity, perhaps, or humility. "Hi, Mom," he said, stopping several yards away, respecting my space. "I know you didn't answer my calls or texts. I know maybe you don't want to see me, but I needed to come in person." I took off my gardening gloves slowly, giving myself time to decide how to handle this. "How did you know I was here?" I asked. "Susan," he admitted. "I called her and explained I wanted to come to apologize appropriately. She warned me that if I came with manipulative intentions, she would personally kick me out. So here I am, without a hidden agenda, without requests. I just want to talk." I invited him in, but not into the house. We sat on the deck, in chairs separated by a coffee table where I put 2 glasses of lemonade. The silence between us was dense, but not hostile. Finally, he spoke. "Tiffany and I are getting divorced." The news didn't surprise me, but I still felt a tug in my chest. "The baby is fine," he continued quickly. "She was born 2 months ago, a girl, perfectly healthy. Her name is Harper. Tiffany has full custody. I see her on weekends." He paused, his hands trembling slightly around the glass. "After everything that happened, after seeing who she really was, who Bradley was, I couldn't continue. I tried to save the marriage for the girl, but every time I looked at her, I only saw what she had done to you, what I had allowed them to do to you." His eyes filled with tears. "I was a coward, Mom. For years I was a coward who allowed his wife to abuse his mother because it was easier than confronting her. And now I have lost everything. My marriage, my family, and, worst of all, your trust." "You haven't lost everything," I told him softly. "You still have a daughter. You still have your job. You still have the opportunity to be better." He looked at me with barely contained hope. "And do I still have you?" The question floated between us like something fragile that could break with a breath. I thought carefully before answering. "Jason, I can't promise you that our relationship will go back to being what it was. That time has passed. That version of me who forgave everything, who accepted any treatment just to keep the peace, that woman no longer exists." I saw his face crumble. But I continued, "That doesn't mean there can't be a new relationship. One built on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and honesty. One where you see me as a complete person, with my own rights and needs, not just as your mother who exists to serve you." He nodded frantically. "That is all I want. A chance to know the strong woman you have become, to learn from you, to be a better son, even if it's late." I told him about my new life. The classes I gave, the friends I had made in town, the routines that filled me with peace. I showed him the garden, the improvements to the house, the studio where I wrote in a journal every night processing my thoughts. He listened with genuine attention, asking questions, showing real interest. Before leaving, he took out his phone and showed me photos of Harper, a beautiful baby with huge dark eyes and tufts of black hair. "Would you like to meet her someday?" he asked with a trembling voice. "When you are ready, of course. No pressure." I looked at the photo of my granddaughter, that little person who carried my blood but who was innocent of all her parents' sins. "Someday," I answered. "But first you and I need to rebuild something solid. She deserves a grandmother who is emotionally available, not one who is still processing trauma." He understood. We said goodbye with a brief but genuine hug, the first in almost a year. After he left, I sat on the deck watching the sunset. Susan appeared shortly after with a bottle of wine. "How was it?" she asked. "Difficult," I admitted, "but necessary. I think there is hope for us, but it is going to take time." She filled 2 glasses, and we toasted. "To new beginnings," she said. "To strong women who refuse to be trampled on," I answered. That night, lying in my bed listening to the sound of the waves, I thought about the whole journey traveled, from the scared woman who answered that call at 3 in the morning, to the woman who now slept peacefully in her own house, mistress of her destiny. I had lost things in the process. The illusion of a perfect family, the naivety of believing that family love was unconditional, the comfort of avoiding conflict. But I had gained something more valuable. My dignity, my peace, my strength. I had won myself back. And in the end, that was all that really mattered.